You know what? Nothing bad ever happened on trips. Never lost anybody.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum, so officially, we're meeting with the Lexington Planning Commission, June 8th. And the next item will be to approve the agenda.
Yes, can we add, excuse me, Blake. John, can we add the, this proposal for a work session on the PDMU zoning to the agenda?
Sure. Has that did make it to
Where we should add it.
let's add that to first item of other business. All right.
Move to approve agenda as amended.
Second,
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. And the next will be to approve the minutes from the May 25th meeting.
I have a question about one thing on there. Do we need to make a motion first before we have?
No. This is where you make amendments.
Okay, on page 3, about halfway down, the second paragraph that starts with A Glacier. And it says there was general agreement to include side and rear setbacks, alleyway entrances, but I'm not sure that that jives with what my memory is. And or maybe I need clarification on whether that means like my comment about about doors that entered onto the alley was that.
I think the idea was that Arnie was going to put together a list of conditions and your
Gotcha.
thoughts about alleyway entrances.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I'm good to go then.
Okay. Anybody else see anything?
I move that we approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Thank you. Okay. Next item will be to open up citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda. Do we have anybody who would like to come up? Okay, we'll close that item. Thank you very much. And move to our 2 items of new business. The first item is PS 2023-03, an application by Pearson Hotchkiss proposing a preliminary subdivision plat, boundary line adjustment and boundary line vacation for parcels located at 111 Rebel Ridge Road, tax parcels 21-2-20 and 21-6-A, and 597 Ross Road, tax parcel 22-1-3. Arnie.
Good evening, everybody. We do have a request to add a portion of 597 Ross Road, which is a tax map number 22-1-3 to the property at 111 Rebel Ridge Road, which is the property at 21-1-20, and to vacate a boundary line between 2 parcels on the property at 111 Rebel Ridge Road. On the bottom, you see the location map there, and this isn't completely accurate because the GIS has not been updated for those of you who have been with us for a little bit. We have already gone through and combined or vacated some of the lot lines that you see for 597 Ross Road. So what's more accurate depiction is what Pearson has put in his plat or his survey, but just to know that part of it. And the second part, this looks a little bit odd simply because this is a leftover in the sense that at the end of Rebel Ridge Road, you have the cul-de-sac there. And then when the entire subdivision was platted, it shows this right of way basically going to the bottom of the hill for the property next door, which is the bottom of the hill and the retention detention pond thing for Kendall. So there's no reason for that roadway to ever go through the property. And now what the applicant, the owners of 111 Rebel Ridge Road are asking to do is actually clean up some inconsistencies. And if you flip over to the next page, which is page 7 of your packet, you see a photograph there and you see a nice driveway leading to the house or the residence. And you would be under the normal assumption that the driveway is on the same property as the house. Well, that's not exactly the case. And that's what they're trying to clean up. If you could flip over then to the next page. And you see that sort of cone shaped that goes through sort of in the curve there that Kate has shaded for you. That is the portion that's being requested to be added to the parcel at 111 Rebel Ridge Road, so that the entire driveway, the entire front yard, and the entire retaining wall would all be on the property at 111 Rebel Ridge Road. So it is really cleaning up a situation that not everything that goes with the parcel is actually on that parcel, if that makes sense. And then there you also see that the property for the Ross Road property at 597, or if I've got the address right, you see that it's actually been cleaned up. So you don't see all those intervening boundary lines. Those have already been vacated.
So the picture on page 8 of the packet, that's the accurate, that sort of conical shaded area. That's going to be the only boundary line adjustment. It looks slightly different than the page on page 5 though, but okay.
So just
Right,
following up on that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, the difference between those two is the existing boundary lines is on the location map on page 5 of your packet. And then the accurate thing that being asked to do is what you see on the boundary line adjustment survey on page 8.
And on page 8, the final boundary will be the green line, if I correctly interpreted. Okay, thank you.
So the frontage along the cul-de-sac for Rebel Ridge Road gets increased from just a few feet to whatever I've gotten written in the packet. So that property was really non-conforming with respect to width because it had only about 10 feet. And that was my estimate for that frontage. And now it'll be 56.28 feet. And we're not so concerned with the fact that the 597 Ross Road parcel is reducing frontage on Rebel Ridge because its front is actually coming off of Ross Road as indicated by the address. So we're making less non-conforming this parcel. And you can do that. You can't make it worse, but you can make it better.
I know it says that there is an agreement between the property owners but where we present, I mean, this is basically taking property away from the Browns and giving it to the Haskets. And they have, there is an agreement to that from the Browns. Is that correct?
There is an agreement. They wouldn't have gone forward and wouldn't have been able to sign the application and gotten to this point without that agreement. Correct. And when the Browns were cleaning up their property, I cannot remember if that was last year or when that was. We had an indication at that time that this was also that this was in the future. In other words, what they're proposing to do now, that was a cleanup that they had intended to do and just didn't want to do it at the time when the Browns did their cleaning up of their and vacating of property lines internal to their parcel.
Great. Any more questions for Arnie before we go to applicant statement? Okay, now's the time for an applicant statement. Anybody would like to make one? No?
We have representatives available for questions.
Okay. Are there any questions for the applicants? No? Okay.
Or just one question for Arnie. Any feedback from neighbors?
Oh, none.
All right, let's open up public comment for this item. We have a talkative bunch today. That's okay. We're just gonna keep moving along then. I'll close public comment for this item and move to commission discussion and decision.
I move to approve preliminary subdivision application PS 2023-03 for A, the adjustment of boundary lines between 111 Rebel Ridge Road and 597 Ross Road, and B, the vacation of the boundary line between tax parcels 21-1-20 and 21-6-A in accordance with the boundary line adjustment plat for Christian Haskett and Margaret Shapiro Haskett, completed by Perkins and Orson as submitted by the applicant.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, that item is now complete. Let's move on to the other stuff, which is our latest iteration of tackling the accessory dwelling units, zoning ordinance amendments 2023-01. And Arnie, you're gonna lead us off on giving us a direction.
I ask for your direction on how long you would want to spend on this, given that you have another couple of items after this. I'm happy to go as long as you like, but I'm just wondering if you would like to set some time limits.
You want to go 3 hours today, Arnie, or?
I preferred a little less.
I don't know. Let's feel it out. I would say maybe and around 6. This part.
Sounds good.
45 minutes. 45 minutes of this, and then I would give 15 minutes for the rest of the stuff.
What you have in your packet are the use and design standards. So we're still following that outline from the AARP guide. And then the second part that you have is, maybe for the first time, I can't recall, sort of the accumulation of that language into more ordinance language. So more the way you would see it in our construct, or for following the way we have it in our ordinance. So I wouldn't focus too much on that part yet. We still have to get through a couple of items, mainly in the nonconformities section. And I also have to admit to one thing. I sort of went a little bit rogue. If you look at page 2 of this section, which is page 19, we were generally following this outline of elements to consider for accessory dwelling units from, again, that AARP. And at some point around F and utility connections, I just decided not to follow the structure here anymore. And we started talking about nonconformities. So I apologize for that. If you could go over, please, to page 24 to sort of follow up on nonconformities. And then we have a couple extra items after that. In the nonconformity section, we realized by listening to the tape that it may have been a little bit unclear or less than clear when we started nonconformity discussion last time, what an illegal unit is versus what a nonconforming unit is, and then how we need to address those. Because when we started first talking about nonconformities, the first thing I had listed there was, what do we do with an illegal structure that is, or an illegal accessory dwelling unit that exists in a detached structure? What do we do with that? But those are two different things, and maybe just to quickly go over it. Currently, we do not allow an accessory dwelling unit in an accessory structure. And if we find an accessory dwelling unit in an accessory structure, it really ends up being the proof of the property owner to show that it is non-conforming. Because in theory, they could have had that accessory unit in the accessory structure since prior to our zoning coming into being adopted here locally, which is sometime in the 50s. But they would have to show us that it was been there and consistently from that period of time. And if they can't prove that, let's say we find out that they just purchased it 10 years ago and put it in without us knowing, and we go and look at the ordinance from 10 years ago and realize that it was not something that was allowed, how do we handle that? So that was that first item that I've now sort of decoupled from the nonconforming section, is now subsection K over on page 25. So that section now says under K, which is legalizing ADUs, again, following the construct for the AARP guide, is illegal accessory apartments in detached structures are required to seek approval for the detached accessory apartment through the conditional use permit, and the accessory apartment must meet all requirements thereof. And the highlighted things are things that we just need to come back to. So does that at least answer the question? And then I can go into what nonconformities are, because I think it's important for us to have something in here that says, what do we do when we come across one that we believe is to be illegal? In other words, somebody is living in a detached accessory structure and it's got a full separate unit. It's not just a bedroom and a bathroom. It's a bedroom, bathroom, and a kitchen, sort of as we defined the accessory dwelling as being a full separate dwelling.
If it's in that case, if it's a structure that is conforming to all the, setbacks and rules, and then it's rather easy, right? Then they just show that that building is, and I guess we wag our finger at them and make them go through the process and get legalized, right? And then, but the problem is if it's also in a non-conforming building, and that leads to finishing up that conversation. Okay.
Right. And my guess is in most cases, it's not going to be clean. In other words, it probably won't be meeting all the rules and requirements that we're going to put forth for a conditional use permit for accessory dwelling. And then it may become an enforcement action, or they try to address whatever their failings are. So that's the first sort of thing. We find one and they have to come in for a conditional use permit if they can meet all the requirements. And if not, they can either try to address those or just stop doing that accessory dwelling unit.
The only comment I have is that it says though as opposed to through. I think detached accessory apartments,
I think you're right.
Yeah.
so it should be through.
Oh,
Thank you for that. There's a fair amount of
Well, that's fine.
wordsmith thing,
just
but
don't
I
wanna
appreciate that. Once we get perhaps beyond today, we'll be looking at this more in ordinance format and then looking for all of those inconsistencies, not just in spelling, but in construct, but also to make sure that we don't have inconsistencies in the code language itself. So we'll appreciate your eagle eye at that time as well. And if there's nothing else on illegal, then the next part is non-conforming. So a structure that is on the rear property line used as a garage, supposed to have a 5-foot setback now, or whatever we require of this new accessory dwelling unit ordinance. If that structure is there, it's 1,600 square feet. It happens to be on the property line. It's non-conforming with respect to setbacks. It may be non-conforming with respect to height, even though that's probably not likely the way our height requirements are written. But so how do we address something that is a non-conforming structure? And what we had agreed to, at least generally, is that we will allow the accessory dwelling unit to go into a detached accessory structure that is non-conforming with conditions. And those are the conditions that we're going to work through this evening. So we've already sort of addressed if it's a new accessory structure that's going to come in with an accessory dwelling unit, then we've already put size requirements on it, setbacks for the most part, even though some of those are placeholders for now. And we can come back to those. But now we're just simply at this point, just going to talk about nonconformities. So if you can think of that, most likely a garage, since we're talking about residential areas, that garage that's in the backyard, that shed, that whatever else you might have, and it's not conforming in some way, how do we address that? How do we allow the accessory dwelling unit to go into that? And how much allowance are we comfortable with? And we will pick all this up through a conditional use permit process, but sort of how much of an allowance, how far out of the normal requirements for an accessory dwelling unit are you willing to sort of take on or allow? So the way G is written on page 24 starts nonconformities, and accessory dwelling units shall be allowed within nonconforming detached accessory buildings in accordance with requirements of Article 16 nonconforming uses. Every code is in our zoning ordinance has section 16, which is about non-conforming lots and non-conforming uses. So in that section, it states more than what I'm about to say, but those nonconformities can generally continue under certain circumstances as long as you don't enlarge them or increase their impact in any way. And then there's some minor rules and regulations to go along with that. So we're referencing that section just to say, and maybe we should bring that whole section back so we look through that to make sure that there aren't any inconsistencies. But you have to meet all the non-conforming use section of the code and shall be subject to the following limitations: that you can, in a detached and non-conforming accessory building, and I'm reading from 1A now, existing prior to whatever the date is of our ordinance or adoption of this particular accessory dwelling unit code, may be altered to make interior alterations, whether structural or non-structural, in accordance with all requirements of Article 16 to create an accessory dwelling, provided the detached accessory dwelling unit can meet the following additional requirements. So now we're talking about that latitude. How much latitude are we willing to allow in a structure that already exists? And the structure may need to be enlarged. It may be too large, and you may have to sort of limit how much of it can be used for this accessory dwelling. But the first one, as an example, it says maximum square footage. Do you want to set a maximum square footage? Generally, we've already said that, 40% of the main unit and no more than 750, I think in one case, and 800 square feet in another. If, for instance, you had a 1,600 square foot accessory structure, you had a really large barn or garage, would you want to limit how much of that could be used for this accessory dwelling unit? Somewhere in line with the 800 or the 750 square feet, or somebody else had asked for, I think, going up to 1,000 square feet as an example, not in non-conforming situation, but we have had a request to bump up the square footage a little bit. So is there a maximum amount? If you had a larger accessory structure, is there a maximum amount that you would want to put on that conversion to an accessory dwelling?
I feel like the maximum, if it's an existing structure that everybody's used to, I don't see a huge problem with that. To me, the issue is the setbacks.
Yeah, how do you deal with setbacks if somebody wants to go over or be right at the maximum square footage, but by expanding to make the maximum square footage, they're in their non-conforming structure, and it gets even closer to, or I guess it would never get closer to.
Yeah, if we're just talking about what's already there, let's say it is a 1,400 square foot, but it's already there. I think as long as it's meeting those setbacks that are required for other detached ADUs, I don't see a problem with that. Because it's an existing structure, as long as it's meeting the setback.
Well, we're going to get into some of the setbacks too.
I know. I don't think you can. I can't separate those
Right.
two.
But
think
we can still set that. So I'm just wondering.
So all this nonconformity discussion is focusing on detached structures. Do the same types of nonconformity issues, are they going to ever play an impact on attached? The accessory dwelling units that are going to be like literally attached to somebody's existing home, like that we've already said has a certain ceiling for floor for size. What do we say, 40% or 7? So I'm just like, you're already, so if we're limiting the size of attached accessory dwelling units, but the workaround is if it's detached, there may be an allowance past that. That's sort of what we're not trying to negotiate.
but maybe that's true for interior units as well. I mean, if it's already there,
Right.
Yeah.
If it's like the third floor of a
right?
big old house, and that is, then we're into, do we up our rule
Right.
on the maximum?
You have to fence off this part and make it a
Of the-
closet. I mean, I'm not, it seems hard to enforce that. particular thing. I don't know.
It will be harder to enforce when we have an interior unit. We have to maybe put a pin in that one. And when we review this, keep an eye on whether or not we have the same sort of flexibility in the internal accessory dwelling unit. And if it's has some sort of nonconformity issue with it, because I don't know the answer off the top of my head right now. But when we go through and have the accessory, because that's the new thing in the accessory dwelling and an accessory structure.
Yeah.
Right now, everything's a conditional use permit. So they will be coming to us and saying, at least initially, we'll have a site plan or a plan of a floor plan. And if it's 1,400 square feet and we set 800 square feet, then they're going to have to show how it goes down to 800 square feet. And the residual is used for something else that isn't part of the accessory dwelling unit, if it's carport or something else. But in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, the enforcement of that, if I'm not sure if that was the point, but it is harder over time to necessarily keep them boxed into that 800 square feet.
Right.
For the internal ones, putting the maximum as a percentage of the total without putting a number on the square footage, that might take care of it, to say, internally, as long as it is not more than 40% or half or whatever it is, so that the accessory, is bigger than the primary, then that could take care of that issue without having to say how many square feet. It's the external ones that matter more, because that's taking up. But if on the hypothetical, there's one with 1,400 square feet, and that's 600 square feet more. That's as big as a whole other, right? And then it comes into the question, which we've never come down to, is how many people are we allowing to live there? Because if you have 600 more square feet, you can have 2 more bedrooms, and you can have more, so that comes into that question as well. So I think it's an interesting thing, because I don't know if there's a good place to bring this up, but if I'm not mistaken from reading the Arlington County one, that they're basically saying if you've got a building built before that certain date, there's no restrictions on it. It's a existing non-conforming, and do what you want because it's there. So that's something to think about on this, and whether they've had problems and what issues,
And I would probably agree with that, except for the setbacks, because I think that there is a real difference between having somebody living on the property line or having a dwelling unit that's right on a property line versus just having a storage unit, say, for the neighbors. And I do think that we could answer a lot of the concern about how big it is based on how many people are allowed to live there.
Let's clarify that part then, because right now a dwelling unit can have, in commercial districts, up to 4 unrelated people and as many related people as you can possibly fit in the thing.
Mhm.
And that reduces down to maximum of 3 unrelated people to constitute a household unit in the residential districts. So, and if we don't do anything else, we have that already in the code. But occupancy is really difficult
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
to
true.
manage. And then the other thing we also have in our definition, even though there's a question mark there, there's also that idea of, are we going to limit it even further? I think one or several of the other ones had a maximum of 2 occupants. So 2 or 3 seem to be fairly standard in some of the other ordinances that we've seen.
So we already have several buildings in town I can think of that are accessory dwelling units, have people living in them already. So if we were to put a limit on the size, does that mean we're supposed to go tell those folks that, oh, by the way, you have to live in 800 square feet versus what you've been living in?
Potentially. In other words,
Yeah.
if they are in accessory detached structures
Right.
and they can't prove that they were non-conforming, truly legally non-conforming, then we have to assume that they're illegal. They had to come through the conditional use permit process. And if they happen to be in 1,200 square feet and we say 800, we haven't said 800, but if we put a limit on it, then yes, when they come through that permit process to get that permit approved, then they would have to meet the code requirements.
Okay, so in this, in part G, are we talking about illegal non-conforming, or we're talking about legal non-conforming? Yeah, so for that reason, I would say you really can't put a square footage limit on it. I mean, that's gonna cause a big problem. And like you said, enforcement's gonna be difficult anyway. But then we can add other requirements with setbacks.
So I think I'm hearing no maximum square footage. Again, placeholders, so you'll still get the
I'd
ability to
say
review this.
Use yellow.
Yellow, okay, we'll highlight that. Okay, so we'll put that aside for now with no, and then we'll highlight it.
Let me ask you a question. If you have a big house and next to it is a garage, and then I just attach the two of them together, right? And I let somebody live in the garage, and it's a big garage, it's bigger than 800 square feet. Does that now become allowed because it's less than 40% of the house? Is that what we're saying?
If the garage was now attached to the house, then that's now an interior accessory
Internal, yeah,
apartment.
and it would have to meet all those requirements that we have. As you're alluding to, the maximum size and
Which we do have a cap of 750 or 800 feet
But it
at the
would,
moment.
okay, but if we do the 40%, then it would be
Well, we have
bigger.
both. We have either 40%
for
to-
detached.
no
For-
internal. Right now, or sorry.
Yeah, currently, yeah, that's what we're at.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
Yeah, both.
I was just suggesting, I was
It's,
just saying the possibility of removing the square footage, that was just a thought, to see what that would affect.
And actually, this begs the question of, the internal, the 40% for internal. It's like, well, what if the owner of the property lives in, like, why can it not be 50%? Because if the owner of the property is living in the smaller unit, what difference does it make? Anyway,
We-
that
we
can come
definitely,
back
we
to that
talked
one,
about
but-
that. Yeah, no, we that's on the record. We talked about that.
know.
Yeah, no, I'm just relooking at section 3. It's for an attached
Right.
40% and 750 square feet.
Just to clarify that, in the discussion on non-conforming and Matt's example. Under 3, are we talking about new ADUs?
That's what I'm.
I just, if someone wanted to build a new ADU in their yard, then it has to meet, we're saying these are the requirements. Okay.
correct. So those general standards,
So I'm just trying to distinguish
Yeah.
between that and what we're discussing on the non-conforming.
So if it was a new structure, wouldn't it have to meet wouldn't it have to meet all of the setbacks and all of the space requirements? But we're talking about existing.
Right.
correct.
So if you had attached your garage before the date that this is signed, then it would have the 40% limit. But if you did it, well,
And you actually had people living in it,
Yeah.
right,
and then that's the difference. If your garage is there and you decide to suddenly turn it into an ADU, then even if it's attached, then you're new. Is that right, Arnie? We're talking.
Let's presume in your scenario that we have this adopted. You come in for a building permit to attach the two, then that's when we'll figure out, okay, you have a garage, you've attached it. Does all that meet setback requirements? Because the detached structure is allowed to be closer to the rear yard than when it's attached. So let's presume you've got enough rear yard and it meets. And then we'd have to look at, if you tell us at that point that you want to do the accessory internal dwelling unit, then we have to look at the requirements that we already have for that and how we've modified them potentially. So I think the short answer is it just has to meet the code when you come in.
Have we anywhere in the ordinance allowed legal non-conforming ADUs to continue to exist as is?
Um,
I mean, if not, I think we should write that statement, but
that would be in. That should be in the regular section 16, but we'll make sure
okay,
to make sure that that statement's there.
okay,
Because that's the section that says if you have a non-conforming use, which is legal,
right,
and you can prove that it is, it's your burden of proof, then you get to continue with that as long as you don't increase it. And then it also explains what happens through an act of God if it burns or if that should be in that section,
okay.
but we'll make sure.
Because as long as that's there, then maybe I'm not so against not setting a maximum square footage limit for new ones coming on or a usable space, I guess. It kind of go either way on that.
Go.
But let's distinguish that conversation between the non-conforming,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right,
new.
right.
Okay. I get easily confused.
Yeah,
so
no, we're talking about the ones that aren't being used right now is,
So if I don't hear any additional questions,
I do actually have, but maybe before we go any further, I just in the paragraph A. It says detached non-conforming accessory buildings existing prior to whatever date may be altered to make interior alterations, whether structural, non-structural. And I'm just wondering whether by using that word interior, if we are excluding adding exterior walls. So I'm thinking about the carport situation. So would this apply to an external, like, can you add an external wall? Since this is all about interior?
my interpretation of that would be that that's just a statement saying it exists in some non-conforming way, and we would be allowing that internal reconfiguration from garage to accessory dwelling. So, and you cannot make a non-conforming work. So if you did add a wall to it, it would have to be probably not towards the setback side, but to the internal side of the property. Because let's say you had a rear yard setback encroachment, and that's what's making it non-conforming.
Mhm.
You couldn't, for 40 feet along your rear yard, it's 5 feet in the setback. You could not make that any worse. So your wall that gets added on, you could not do that in that setback area where you're already. So any new part would have to be conforming to the rest of the setback requirements.
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm just wondering whether the use of the word interior alterations to me says interior to the building, not,
Right.
Yeah, not adding.
Not-
more
not, like,
versus something
here's-
else.
here's the footprint in my building.
Mhm.
This is an exterior wall. This is the interior.
Mhm.
So I don't know whether we want to make that clear or whether that is already clear enough. I don't know.
I think it may be clear enough, but we'll check that to make sure, in the sense that it says interior alterations are okay, structural and non-structural, in accordance with all requirements of Article 16. And again, that's where we're going to pick up the language for what is allowed with a non-conformity.
Yeah.
And nowhere in there does it say, that I recall, that you can't add on to the building where you're allowed to and where it doesn't further violate whatever the non-conforming situation is. In this case, it was presumably setbacks.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think about maximum. So if you had a 600 square foot accessory building, and let's say we had an 800 square foot maximum, where could you add on the 200 to get you up to your maximum? It's not going to be in further in the setback that you're
Sure.
violating. It's going to have to be
Sure. Yeah,
internal.
no, that part I totally get.
So we'll highlight that one and put no maximum square footage for the first one in that list. And then the second
So-
one,
Sorry. What about just taking out the word interior then? make alterations,
We could.
whether structural or non-structural.
Hesitating on it a little bit because
Maybe
we
put that in
brought
yellow.
that forward from Arlington or somewhere, so there may have been an intent for that. So we'll
We name it.
double highlight
Have to
that
do with
and then see.
like, look, just exterior alterations being like just not following the use and design or the character of the neighborhood type thing. It's not,
My presumption is it's non-conforming for some reason.
yeah.
It's okay to do stuff on the inside because that's not making anything worse. So the exterior, if there is an exterior, it's going to have to meet the code requirements. I don't believe it has anything to do with aesthetics.
Okay.
I think it has to do with like putting a kitchen in or a bathroom into a garage is what it's talking about.
I got you. Okay.
If you got the thing sitting there, you can do what you like on the interior. That's not making it any worse, but anything that gets added to it is going to have to meet the code.
So
What is,
it's-
oh, sorry.
So if I had a gazebo,
Right. That's
with
what I
no
was gonna say.
walls.
Right. What is our definition of an accessory building? Because yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. If you have a gazebo.
It's going to have to meet requirements for building code anyway. So a gazebo, it might be a bit of a stretch, but it's still there and it's still something. So what do we have for accessory structure definition? If
Because then you would
anything.
get into structural.
right, you'd have to have,
Even adding a wall, an exterior wall, you'd be getting into
right,
structural. Okay.
exactly.
So
Although this says structural or
It does
non-structural.
say structural. no.
Yeah, I think that's a different set of regulations already to do that sort of thing.
Exterior wall.
Yeah, I think this is talking about taking a structure and making it able to be used as a dwelling unit, something that wasn't before a dwelling unit, and reconfiguring it on the inside to make it a
Right.
dwelling unit, like putting in a
But-
bathroom or kitchen.
But what if you have to add exterior walls to make it,
Right, well, you could, like Connie said, you can do that anyway, as long as you follow. I mean, you can put a wall in front of your garage and not make it a garage you can pull into anymore. You can do that anyway, right? As long as you're not in a setback, right? Is that right? Am I?
right,
So that's why I think
Okay,
that's
all right,
that sort of
yeah.
thing, any kind of structural additions or changes and enlarging or whatever is covered by other regulations, is my understanding.
great.
and it's a structure either way. So when I think about setbacks, what is a structure that has to meet setback requirements? And of course, we have fences and other things that are allowed to be in setbacks. But just about anything, like a gazebo is definitely a structure, and if it's over 256 square feet, you have to get a permit for it. So the conversion of anything to a dwelling unit is going to have to follow building code requirements.
Mhm.
And if the wall is going to have to be the normal section of wall that you're used to, stud 16 inches on center and insulation and all that, that's all going to come under the building code requirements. And then for us, yes, it's a structure, it doesn't matter. I think in my mind, at least at this time, if it's a gazebo, if it's a garage, if it's a chicken coop, might not be the best example. But conversion of those things to a dwelling are going to have to meet the building code requirements.
Right, but you will get out of some of the standards. I mean, we're gonna do the section G to allow some exceptions, I assume, on standards. So you don't want to allow people to reserve any footprint by sticking something on there that could later be converted. So what is our definition of, or do we have a definition of accessory buildings? Because only accessory buildings can be converted.
We have accessory use or structure in the zoning ordinance. And the definition is a use or structure which is clearly subordinate and customarily incidental to the main use or structure. It is accessory to and located upon the same lot occupied by the main use or structure. Structures attached to the main building shall be considered part of the main building.
So a gazebo fits that definition,
Mhm.
it sounds like.
But I don't think you want to allow
Mm-mm.
a gazebo to fit into G. I mean, I think we're talking about a fairly substantial building.
And that is not distinguished at this time.
Yeah, right. So I think that's one thing I would say we need to do.
I think so
I don't know
too.
what we're talking about at this point. I really don't understand what's going on with discussion of like a gazebo. If you have an accessory building
Right.
and you can do with it what you want if you are following all the building codes, right?
Right.
Yeah, and then you can this is then saying, you can then also add the bathroom and the kitchen and make it accessory dwelling unit.
But what we're really talking about in G is you've got a nice sturdy, for instance, we did the zoning on Stonegate, the property on Main Street that had the carriage house back
Mhm.
there. So that building would be a good example of something that would be good for an accessory dwelling unit. It is being used as an
Right.
accessory dwelling unit. We're wanting to take buildings like that that are already in place, not being used as that, and allowing them to come
Right.
into this ordinance. And we'll probably give them some allowances. We're probably not going to give them. I mean, we already talked about it some, is if they back up on an alley, we'll give up some of the setback. We wouldn't necessarily do that for a new structure.
But, right, but what's this? I'm not sure what we're arguing about the interior, this word interior in here. I don't understand this conversation.
I don't want to speak for anybody, but is it just the concept of closing in an open structure, like a structure that's completely open and it
Right.
was not
Yeah.
and just the fact of closing it in and putting
Yeah.
having four walls now, but
There are rules for that. You can do that. You can do that, right?
Right, as long as they don't fit in these rules in section G. Is that what, I mean, I assume that's what we're talking about. We're talking about existing, are we talking about like a
Yeah.
situation on Edmondson where they have that building? That's,
Yeah, it's non-conforming because it doesn't have the setbacks. And you want to put a wall in the front of it. Yeah, okay, I don't think it.
I guess that's a bigger question. Are we going to allow for some of these already existing buildings, some extra allowances outside of our rules? And if,
Yeah, I hope so.
and that's what this section is addressing.
Yeah.
Right.
So we need to decide what kind of buildings are accessory buildings that we would allow this to happen. So that's where it comes in. Okay, a gazebo that's there, does that qualify? Well, not necessarily. You're gonna let them skimp on the setbacks because they have a gazebo. It's different than if you have a barn,
Why?
because it's already a fairly built structure,
Right?
a sturdy
And if
structure.
it's big enough to put an ADU in it, why can't you convert that if you can convert a
Okay.
garage?
And that's okay if you're willing to say you're allowed to do that. And because you're doing that, because you already had the foundation there, then you're allowed to bypass whatever we're going to let these people bypass, which I assume is setbacks to a degree.
I think you're only bypassing the part that's already in the setback. So the gazebos aren't typically that large. So
Yeah.
if you have 100 square foot gazebo and you want to add a 400 square foot accessory dwelling to that, then the new part still has to stay outside of the setback.
Right.
So I'm not sure because again, most gazebos are small, and I guess that's the point is what lighter structure or what less permanent structure would we allow to
Qualify.
have
Yeah. Right. That's right.
standing, if you will, towards this allowance.
Right, so does it have to have, say, a foundation, like we have a gazebo that has a brick floor? Does that count? Could I make that, could I just sort of take up the bricks and pour some concrete and make that?
This hasn't come up, so I'm a little bit at a loss to sort of providing guidance for distinction between lighter framed buildings versus other buildings, because that hasn't come up in sort of, I haven't seen that distinction in any other
Is,
ones.
Arnie, isn't the one on Lime Kiln that we were requesting, that's only a carport?
Well, it's
and
half
that-
carport and half walled in structure.
No, that's more structure.
Yeah.
I
But is
think
it enough structure?
Right.
Well,
That's it.
so I think as long as as it meets the setbacks, I would still, I mean, if it meets the setbacks, it's probably not that big of an impact on other people. And that's what we're really looking at, right? We want to make sure there's not too much.
Right. And which set of setbacks? Our current setbacks or the setbacks from whenever that building was built?
No, current setbacks.
See, and that's what I'm saying. I think for these existing buildings, I would assume we would allow some leeway on setbacks.
Because since we're the non-conforming section, I presume most of these are going to be non-conforming with respect to setbacks.
Yeah.
So
Right, but
we-
then there's a
if- but if-
question of whether does that automatically mean that they get to have an ADU
Right,
just
That-
because? You
Yeah,
know,
right.
I mean, we're not trying to allow just everybody to have an ADU just because they want one. You also have to think about the neighbors.
But the only point of this section is if we're gonna allow these non-conforming already existing buildings to become ADUs. If we're not, we don't need this section, but
Right.
I think we've seen enough good buildings that, yeah, I think it makes sense to allow some leeway on setback.
and we're still going to get to some of the setbacks. So if it, let's say there's a 10-foot setback on the side and the structure is 5 feet into that setback, is that okay? Probably not all the way up to the property line. That's probably too far for it. But so how much we're in that 0 to 10 feet, or is the leeway okay? I think I'm hearing from you, no leeway on setbacks potentially.
But whenever these types of nonconformities come up, it's conditional use permit, right? So what can we not, can the planning commission at the time not decide at the time if it's an appropriate flexible amount, or like, why are we coding in our flexibility?
It would be really helpful in the exception, if you will, to say you can be in the setback, but if it's chosen, but not closer than 5 feet to the property line, so that it's not so completely objective in each individual case that, yeah, in this case, because I would prefer that there's some standards around when you were making that decision.
Okay.
That if there's, at least at this point, some concern that you can't go all the way up to 0, that we have allowance, but no closer than whatever X ends up being.
Right.
So
You want people to
sort
feel like
of-
they're not,
standards.
you don't have to know somebody on the planning commission, or, you don't have to have some in. I think it's,
Yeah, so okay, so but it's always gonna feel like a slightly conditional based on if it's on a busy street, a small alleyway, an R2 and R1, like there's always gonna be some variation. So
Mhm.
we could just speed up this whole process and say 5 feet. Like right now, the setback's 10, we'll make it 5, because you're asking for a number, like, let's just give them a number, 5 feet. Like, right? It's gonna be, it's really gonna be different no matter what.
So that would be 5 feet for only non-conforming.
Yeah.
I'm afraid this conversation we're having now is a different conversation than what we started with, and I'm not sure where we're going with this. Like, we're
Well,
having an overall overarching conversation
Yeah.
about the whole thing, and we were just talking about why is the word interior in here.
Okay, well, sorry, I
So
feel
I'm
like
just-
now we're talking, now I'm asking,
Now we're talking separate.
he wants us to provide him very specific
Right,
flexibility. So like,
Right.
what's the buffer of us saying that you can now bring?
right, but I mean, we kind of got stuck on number one, A1 there, we got the maximum square footage, and then before we moved on, we didn't even get to the doors on the alleys.
You're right. Yeah.
So that's what I'm wondering what we're trying to do here.
Well, because I think we said it's all coming back to setbacks.
Okay,
Our whole
Well,
thing, if we're gonna allow this is not, as if we decide on the setback
Right.
issue.
well, are
And-
we having that conversation now, setbacks?
No, we should go in order. Let's go in order.
Yeah,
But I guess I
Once
need
for
a
now.
direction from Arnie that he just actually needs numbers instead of us.
Yeah.
Like saying we'll get to it when it comes up. Like he just wants us, so for 1 through 8, we need to provide guidance.
Right,
So
and number one, we
1 through
said
1.
no maximum square footage, right? And then that's where we stopped.
Yeah, let's come to setbacks another time, because there's
Yeah.
probably other ways to deal with the issue of noise on setbacks. So I would agree with Pat. Let's park it and
so can we highlight the word interior in section A? Thank you.
by the way, I have no problem with adding external. But
That's-
that's a
that's it.
minor point. Don't go there. Go on to number 2, door access onto the alley.
Or number 2, during our last conversation, there was some discussion about narrow alleys. Do we want to allow not the door, the overhead garage door necessarily if we have a garage door in the apartment above, but do we want to have the doorway to the accessory dwelling unit opening onto the alley just for safety purposes to prevent that conflict potentially?
I would prefer it not to open directly onto the alley. On the first floor, on the alley level,
And is that just, I'm sorry,
and that's a safety issue.
safety issue?
Oh, I was just gonna say directly on the alley, if it's 5 feet from the alley. Is that directly on the alley?
Yeah, that's still directly. I'm just thinking, alleys are not as well traveled.
But if
They're
there's a
not
sa-
public in terms of, kids walking on the alley and somebody's living in this accessory dwelling unit that has a door right there.
But if there's a
it-
setback, if you have a setback, then it's 5 feet away from there. And why can't you have a back door to your ADU going onto the alley?
Yeah, maybe so.
Now, if there's no setback and it's right onto the alley, that's a different question. And that's a safety issue because there might be a car coming by.
I'm not thinking about physical safety, or I'm talking about, somebody doing nefarious things.
In Lexington.
Okay.
Fine.
Well,
I would say, I would kind of go with no door access unless it's more than 5 feet from the alley.
I would agree with that.
Because you're allowed to have a garage door right on the.
Allowed to have a back door.
right, but you're not somebody
Yeah.
living there.
I mean, if someone they can just lock it. If they want to have a back
Yeah.
door, they can have a back door. I don't see why I can't.
Not to complicate this, but trying to figure out where we're measuring from. Alleyway, if you're probably not going to have pavement, but let's say you have a little wider alley, a 12-foot alley, and you have 8 feet of sort of travel lane gravelled through there, and there is a little bit of sort of grass area. Am I measuring to the property line
Yeah,
between the
property
two?
line, your
or-
property line, 5
Property
feet
line.
from your property line towards the alley.
So what are you saying on the door? Access from the alley, yes or no?
Yes, as long as it is at least 5 feet from the property line to the alley.
Okay,
Is that good
I-
for now for a placeholder?
so if we
Yep.
have a non-conforming that's is on the property line, they will have to,
Depends.
Depends on whether we allow them to be on the property line.
We haven't quite decided.
Take
Yeah.
out the
Right.
door.
don't we have one?
But again, this isn't this is not gonna come up very much. I mean, I think the ones we looked at on Edmonton, they don't have back doors, do they? I mean, that's,
How do they get an address put on them? Is just is the address associated with the front door or back door of the apartment, or is the address associated with the front door of the main house? Or, yeah, I just don't understand.
Where would the mail to get
Yeah,
delivered?
Yeah, I can't.
I think for the most part, it's going to come off the front street, the main street. I can't think of any off the top of my head, not that I know all of them, but it would be, 20 Edmondson A, and they might have to put like a little arrow or something that says go down the side of the building. But we wouldn't, for Ross Road, that alley behind the subject parcel at 30 Edmondson, that's Ross Lane. I don't think we're going to give a Ross Lane address because that's a private alley, not a public street. So my guess is for 911, we would be coming off the main street to get them there. Then they would know A is in the back and they'd go to A. But that's my presumption at this time.
Next item. Let's keep going, which we gotta plow through at least 1 through 8.
Yeah, right.
In 2 minutes.
So,
do
so
it.
what
Oh,
is in 3, it says on interior lots, ... What
I
are
didn't
you?
do a great job there,
Sides.
admittedly. If you flip
Next
over
page.
to the next page, we're pulling again from, I think it was Arlington that said in number 1 on top, on interior lots, the nearest wall of the accessory building shall not be located closer than 5 feet to a side or rear lot line. So they were trying to make a distinction for new structures. So I was just wondering, do we set setbacks for non-conforming things that are already in the setback? So what's your pain point, I guess? Again, using that 0 to 10 feet for a side yard setback, if the structure is already there and it's 5 feet from, which is 5 feet more than what we would require today for a 10-foot setback, it's already 5 feet in. Is that acceptable on an interior lot? And then sort of the same discussion for corner lots, just because they're a little bit different. So the question is an allowance for interior lots for setbacks. So we're right back at that setback
Yep.
discussion.
There we are. So right now, the requirement is what? For a rear setback on an interior lot,
For a
for a
Rear?
an accessory.
an accessory structure in both the R1 and R2 zoning districts is 5 feet for accessory structures
From the rear,
from the rear property line.
and how about from the side?
10 feet for R1 and 15 feet for R2. Excuse me.
Which at some point I'd like to discuss that again, because really for the primary building, it's 25 feet, but for this, just to throw that out.
So what do you all think about 5 feet for the rear? Having it stay with the 5 feet.
Is there a big, well, I think I listened to the whole last meeting, and I think I kind of found myself in disagreement about setbacks. So maybe I should just say that right now, because I think that most of these structures, I think, if we have any, are gonna come from pre-existing buildings. And I would bet that most of them are non-conforming, because that's just how things were built. You put your garage right on the property line. Why have space behind your garage? I mean, what are you gonna do back there? Kids go back there and smoke, whatever, right? I mean, that's what that's for. So I kind of think if you are going to have a mandatory setback, say on the side of 5 feet, I mean, if you're gonna have you almost might as well not do this, because you're not gonna get structures that are going to be off the property line. I think that's my sense, that my feeling is you're gonna have to allow them to be up to the property line. Because that's gonna be the fact, I think, of a lot of these buildings. And I think if the next door neighbor's house is far enough in on their own property, I think that's gonna give enough of a buffer. And I think if you're putting a 600 square foot ADU up on the property line, and the neighbor is 15 feet from their property line, which I guess is non-conforming now, right? It's right. But even still, I think that's going to be enough of a buffer. I don't think a 500 square foot, I don't think the level of use there, I don't think it's going to be a disturbance to the neighbors. And I just was driving around today looking at how close houses are to each other in our town, and we've been living that way. I think maybe if you could say, well, don't put an air conditioning unit on that side. Okay, that you could say that, so you don't have to hear the hum of the window unit, or you can't put any of the HVAC stuff. Or you can't even have windows, don't have a window on that side, kind of block up those windows and have the windows on the other parts. I think if that other house is far enough away, I think you kind of have to allow it. And it kind of gets back to, Blake, you're saying, what is every single instance, a judgment call without a lot to go on. But I feel like we have to have a way to say at some point we're gonna have to allow some of these right on the property line, because that's the fact of what's on the ground. Now, if that means to say, well, how do you make it not just a judgment call? Well, suppose the other house is far enough from its property line that it creates enough of a buffer. If that other house is, non-conforming and right up on its property line, and then that's might be an example to say, no, that's not going to be any good. We can't just have 5 feet between these two houses or the ADU. But if you set an amount that the other neighbor has, then I think that will work. But I'm really worried about ruling out so many of these structures. And I don't know, with the alley exemption, you say, well, because there's an alley there, does that, I don't know. I mean, then how much space do we have between those properties? I'm not sure why alleys are so special. Is it just that it's more of a buffer?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I just feel like my feeling is that because we're going to have so many non-conforming structures that are right up on property lines, that if we say there has to be setback, you're going to exclude a lot of them, and it's going to defeat the purpose of what we're trying to do. That's my position.
Can I be reminded where we ended up with 2?
5 feet.
5 feet
From the-
so then that kind of flies. That means, okay, so
That's
that
just the
protects,
door.
that means that protects. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that's fine.
I agree with Pat in a lot of ways. And I agree with Arnie that numbers are good because it gives you discrete numbers to work with. And I'll just repeat that anytime this comes up, it's a conditional use and there's always going to be a judgment call. And I know that it's easier to make a judgment call based on, this is actually 5 and it should be 15 or it should be 10, but I think it depends on the neighbors. And you're right. If the neighbors are cool with it, if the neighbors, is it up against a park? Is it up against is there a
Wooded
fence?
area.
Is there a fence? Is there, I don't know.
The only thing I have, the only concern I have, I mean, I agree with your argument. What is the effect on the neighbors? But the neighbors right now, when I make the adjustment to my house, are not necessarily going to be the same neighbors 10 years from now. And so have we, by not constraining this development, have we impacted neighborhoods in an unintentional way by not? Because I don't care if nobody shows up right now. Again, it's 10 years from now, after I've sold my house and now all of a sudden things are different.
But at least the good thing about that is if it's done 10 years from now, then the people who buy it, it's already like that. And so to them, it's fine. I've seen examples of that in my neighborhood, looking for where there could be ADUs and, having a garage put up that was maybe too close to the property line. We were enraged at some point. Now all the neighbors who move in, it's already like that. So they don't care so much.
Right.
But I do worry about, I'm the one who's been saying, don't put density numbers, but you're changing the density of your neighborhood pretty severely. If we don't set some kind of limits, and I agree with Pat saying we need to give some room on setbacks to these non-conforming buildings that are already there because we're already used to them. But I'm not so sure that I want that to be 0. And for me, it also says we should think about on the new buildings that the rear setback should be farther away so that if you have an existing building and a new building, they're not just 10 feet apart. There's a little more buffer if you allow 0 for the existing and then 10 for the other. So I do think we need I
don't know about the density argument there, because I don't think you're going to have a bunch of these on any given block. I think we're talking about adding, I don't know how many blocks have enough of these structures that could be converted and that would be converted. I don't think it's so much in adding a density to the neighborhood that you're going to.
Arlington County says 5 feet. That's a great number.
But Arlington County also says if it's a pre-existing building, you can have at it and do what you want.
Somewhat separate discussion. By the way, Pat, your statement is compelling, and I agree. And as noted in our last discussion, this is most of many of the ADUs that we're going to be talking about that'll come before Planning Commission are existing buildings are near the property lines. And secondly, we maybe, we want to encourage this even in neighborhoods have smaller lots. And so this is the challenge. So kind of an aside question, Arnie, is when we talk about a conditional use permit, are we talking only about the same 4 conditions? So is there any case where you have a conditional use permit that is particular to an ADU, for example, that could be worded slightly differently or more tailored to the issues that we're talking about?
I think that's what I'm getting at is with this 5 feet, let's just say we throw a 5 feet, you can go in a non-conforming structure as long as that non-conforming structure is a minimum of 5 feet from the setback, I don't know, side, rear, whatever it ends up being. So you would look at so those are within your standards, use and design standards for accessory dwelling units, for non-conforming structures. So when somebody's coming in and we're clearly requiring a conditional use permit, so yes, you have those 4 very loose criteria, shall not affect the health, safety, welfare, and those will always be there, but you can more directly condition some of these individual uses.
It through the criteria of the conditional use or through,
We're not changing the 4 criteria. Those
Okay.
will always stay there. We're in our use and design standards, which is what we're working on, saying that you can get a conditional use for this situation, but not for anything that's greater than or closer than 5 feet to the property line. I can't.
I mean,
can
I
look-
think it's, if we put 5 feet, you can't, in a conditional use permit, you can't go against that, right?
Right.
But if you don't have it, you could say you have to have 5 feet in this instance because the neighbor's house is a non-conforming setback and it's within 5 feet and these would be on top of each other, right? So it can work that way, right? You see what I'm saying? If it says 5 feet, then you can't say, okay, we'll make an exception here and you can do it. But if it's not there, you could say conceivably, this is just not going to work unless there's a setback. And then
But what
you can-
Arnie's looking for is some guidance from us. I mean, I agree with you.
Right, so I'm able to, what my suggestion is to give a number on the setback on the other house. If the other house is far enough from that property line, then that creates a buffer. You know, maybe not as big as if both were, new structures and conforming. But it would still give enough of a buffer that would be, say, typical of what we have in our city.
so it could read something to the effect that if you don't have 5 feet, but the
Distance between.
distance between the wall and the abutting
Neighbor houses.
neighbor house is
is-
greater than X.
You
then-
can't
But-
do
but-
that.
but,
Why
yeah,
not?
I
Why
know
can't you
we-
do
we
that?
talked about
Because
that.
then all of a sudden you're imposing on the other property owner.
Yeah.
And in a way that is unexpected. Oh, yeah, you built that. I saw you have 10-foot setback. I'm right on the property line, so I'm gonna be fine here. That prevents the other person from who could have gone another 5 feet towards.
No, they
the
can't.
property line.
They couldn't because they couldn't build something new then anyway because of the setback requirements.
what
You're
is
you're
this?
not stopping that neighbor from building something. They already couldn't build it if they were too close. Right?
What is the side setback for a main structure? Primary structure,
10 feet in R1, 15 feet in R2.
10 feet. So we're talking about now, if you've got let's call it a side setback. So you've got 2 buildings, sorry, you've got
Yeah.
10 feet. I have a visual thing.
10 feet and
So
10
here
feet.
we've got the main structure over here, which is big. And then we've got, this is the side property line. So this is 10 feet. So you can have just 10 feet between these houses. Is that enough? I
Well,
guess is the question.
that would be a question of how much is enough, I mean, that, right? But
But-
I was thinking 15 feet, but I don't, which I was kind of pulling out of my hat.
So, but but that would say the 5-foot setback. Right? Because
Right,
this
right. So
person-
good. That's an instance where you can say, okay, you know what, in this instance, you don't have the setback on your property and the other house is too close. And then you say, yeah, that gives an objective criterion.
But if, let's say it's 15 feet. Move this over, make it bigger. So here we've got 15 feet. These people are, planning down the road to add a bump out that would take them to the 10-foot setback. And now are they not able to do that because these people, there's now only 10 feet between these buildings and they're supposed to be 15?
Yeah.
I think there's either we write it in such a way to make it clear that they still have the right to go to 10 feet,
Yeah,
but it's their
It's their choice to be
their
closer
choice
to
to
the.
do that. They're making that conscious decision. They know that other is already closer than, and then they're deciding they still want the bump out and they go forward with the setback to 10 feet.
But that kind of defeats the whole point of the zoning, right? If you can say, I want to do this because I want to have the bump out. I don't care if I break the zoning rules, because even the zoning rules are only imposed upon me now because the other person was allowed to build closer than their setback. So
Well, I think
Although
what we're
this is
trying to
already
figure out is the
there.
leeway with the nonconformity. So it isn't.
so it's already there. It's already there, but it's not, nobody's living in it.
Madam, I agree with you on that point, though, that I keep going back and forth on the ADUs in general. I kind of like the idea of them, but then again, I look at it and say, we're avoiding our whole subdivision rule. I mean, you should have enough, you're going to put a house there, you should have enough, the minimum lot size and everything. So I see what you're saying and I agree with it. I'm having that issue too.
that's more your
But you're right, it's a difference between if you're going to put a house there versus there is the house
Yeah,
there.
right. Now, I think the
That's-
existing structures are different.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, I'm not against setback. I'm not saying to get rid of setbacks for new ADU structures if someone's gonna build something. I'm not saying let those be placed on the property line. I'm talking about non-existing, non-conforming. Right,
Right.
so that's, be clear on that.
So I have a question that is related to this. If you have a property, so let's say my neighbor in the backyard has a shed that's up on the property line. And they turn it into a dwelling unit, an ADU. Can I put a fence, a privacy fence, say an 8-foot privacy fence that blocks their house right on that property line?
I'm sorry, did you say that accessory structure that was converted is on the property line?
Would we allow somebody to put an 8-foot privacy fence?
right there.
Well,
Right
it's a
there.
7-foot maximum, but yes,
it's a
if you
7-foot
do a
maximum.
Yeah,
7-foot
why not?
maximum, you have the right to do that on your property. My only first knee-jerk question is if that is an egress window
Right.
and I don't know the answer to that in that
So-
the building code requirements.
Right. So Pat, you made a comment about how, maybe there are no windows allowed on that
Mhm.
wall. Maybe that gets to it. No windows, no,
AC,
no,
window. You,
certainly no you wouldn't be able to have an exit
Bedroom.
onto somebody
somebody else's
else's
property, right, yeah.
property. Yeah.
A bedroom, because the bedroom requires that window egress potentially, but maybe a kitchen without windows. I don't know.
Well, but
would be
you can
allowed.
have a house with no
Or with-
windows on one wall, correct?
Yeah.
So maybe
And that is
that's,
a design element when we'll get this into this, not with tiny houses, with cottage housing. A lot of those are oriented in such a way because they are close that they will specifically not have windows on one wall so that their view is across their own little yard and then to a wall that doesn't have windows. So there's just privacy built in. So that is a design.
so is
tactic.
that something that we could require here in this?
We
If you have a non-conforming building, you're not allowed to have windows that look on or doors that open onto a neighbor's property if your
In the setback.
current structure is on the property line.
on the property line or within 3 feet of
Or
the
within-
property
yeah.
line or whatever the number is. Yeah, I think we could write that in.
Arnie, sorry, clarify this for me one more time. I know you already have. Non-conforming, say you want us to say normally it's 10 feet, but on a non-conforming, we could go up to 5 feet. But then somebody else's now has a non-conforming that they're converting their shed, which is right on the property line. Because they're not within that 5 feet of flexibility that we coded into the zoning use and design, they can't even come in for a conditional use
Correct.
permit. They can't even come in for it. Okay.
And I'm not requiring or requesting or suggesting that you have a 5 foot, or it's, where are you comfortable? Is it, if it exists on the property line, this non-conforming structure, are you okay with, like, as in Arlington, that you get to build the whole thing out? Or you utilize the whole thing for an accessory dwelling? Or is there more of a desire to have some sort of minimum that would then preclude those structures that are on the property line? So where is that comfort
Mm.
level? And I know this,
I think the challenge for us is that we're trying to craft something that fits Lexington.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge. I mean, that's the debate among us, is how to do that. So as not to exclude too many opportunities for that.
since we're largely visual people,
Mhm.
would it be helpful to sort of further this at the next discussion if we had some really simple little plot plans
Yes.
with a garage that's up against this property line, and just to give you a few examples so that we can sort of run through, because there's still a lot of things in my mind that need to be sort of nailed down in with respect to where are we comfortable on the side property lines with non-conforming structures, rear property lines with non-conforming structures. What if it's a alleyway on the rear or on the side, corner lots
Mhm.
versus in, so
Mhm.
maybe we provide a few examples, and that would be our exercise at the next meeting. Actually, our next meeting is going to be largely taken up by something else. But the next time we bring this up fully, we sort of go through some probably really rudimentary sketches just to get an idea of where we're comfortable and where we're not with respect to non-conforming structures and setbacks in particular.
Yes.
That's a great idea, and I would focus on the non-conforming in the discussion, and we get that sorted, so we're comfortable with it, and then move on to some of the other issues.
Yeah.
Can I make another suggestion? Make it almost like you are in control. You have all the different pieces. You have a lot size, maybe 2 adjoining lots. You have a structure. You have some grids on there so that we can all be looking at the same image, and we can adjust the
Move
different
things around.
pieces. Yeah, like, like have a house. I mean, I
I don't know what my
it would be-
capabilities are, but we'll figure
it would
something
be nice,
out.
'cause then we would all know. We would all know, kind of, and you could reproduce. Yeah, I don't know.
It almost is,
crazy.
it almost feels like it'd be faster that you could just literally inventory every property and and just see where are the current non-conforming structures, and that
Yes, we could. That
based on
that
the
could be done
scale
in
of
one
Lexington,
afternoon.
it'd probably be faster to do that.
It could be done in one afternoon. Yes.
My worry about, sometimes when we have somebody's specific property in mind, then that sort of shades maybe a little bit. So I was thinking a little bit more generic, maybe pulling from some of those and using them as examples without the street addresses or the,
Yeah.
but
because-
ultimately we do need to,
Yes.
once we develop something, go find the ones and then bring them back to see how that measures up against what we've got, and then make adjustments accordingly. So if you have examples that I'm certainly not aware of, because I know my neighborhood better, so if you have problem properties or ones that you have questions about, could that structure be turned into, and how could it? We can certainly have a running list and then sort of go through those towards the end of this.
Yeah, because essentially we have a small set
Mhm.
of properties in Lexington. And we're only now dealing with the ones that are already there, because we've
Mhm.
already decided for new construction, which we can't predict, but we already know. So I'm just saying, yeah, I think that's fine. Some sort of compromise. I don't, yeah. Having examples is great. I don't know if we need to get modular building blocks out here and like squish things together, but I think we're good. Yeah. Yeah, we definitely blew past 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
And we didn't fill in any blanks.
We got to
got
do.
yellow. We still have yellow.
I'm just trying.
Maybe I should have missed this meeting too. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can we actually just put, can you write in there and maybe in yellow, no windows?
All right, let's
Because I
open
think
up.
that's that would alleviate almost all of my concerns. No windows on the, if it's on
property
the
line.
property line.
Which it's very good to have somebody on the board in this situation, because I am interested in hearing from the community what their thoughts are. So it's good to get some firsthand perspective.
All right. Are we good? Let's move on to public comment. You guys are chomping at the bit. We can, oh, no, good. All right, please state your name and address.
My name's Mirabai McLeod. My address is 451 Lime Kiln Road. And most of you know that my house is the house on Lime Kiln that you're all referring to. When we first started this process, I had 3 issues. We're down to 1. The shared wall, I knew that was going to be done away with. I really appreciated you listening to me about the size of things and changing things, so that makes it work for me. The issue now with the boundary, I have not 1 inch of a setback. My building has been there for over 50 years. It's been used by myself for 11 and a half years as a catering business, where 18-wheeler trucks would come and make deliveries sometimes every week. Produce trucks would come. I'm looking to simplify the whole thing and just have 1 apartment with 1 person with 1 car. And I think my neighbors will love it. In respect to what you've been talking about a lot, from my building where I want to do the ADU to my neighbor, there's about 26 feet between us. That whole side of that house is a porch. So it will never be built out. It will never be a lot of the things that you've talked about. It's owned by Tim Welsh. I talked with him yesterday, explained the situation to him. He's happy to write a letter to you saying he's fine with not any kind of setback, exactly the way it is. It won't make any difference to the neighbors because the building's not changing at all, except that wall will be moved to the front. It'll be closed in, but it has concrete floor, it has concrete walls, it has a roof that's in good shape. I only need to do that external wall, but the building itself is not changing. I don't know what else to say to you to make it work. I think exactly what you said, Pat. There's going to be a lot of these things that are right on the boundary. I also don't think, I keep hearing from these discussions, all of these ADUs. I don't think there's going to be a lot of ADUs. I think most people want to just keep their little plot, not rent anything, not build anything. They want their lives as they are. So I think that it's not that big a thing. And I do think that a lot of the already existing ones are going to be on that boundary line. So I know you don't want to, the term that keeps coming to me is grandfathered in. It seems that since it's already been this way, it's already been used as a business, it's being simplified, it's being trying to create a needed dwelling unit. There's got to be some kind of way, in my simple mind, there's got to be a way to make it work. It either the doing away with the boundary or having some kind of way to grandfather it in. And I understand the difficulty with that, because then you have to look at each individual case. But again, in my simple mind, it seems like if I was allowed to do a business there for all these years, what's the difference? You know, except that this new prospect simplifies it for the neighbors. If it helps, I could get a letter from Tim Welsh. He's happy to do that. And I asked him, it was funny because I said to him, if I do this, do you see any way this will impact your value of your house? And he thought for a minute. He says, first of all, now it's just a rental house. Nobody's going to say, I'm not going to rent that house because her building's on the boundary line. I mean, that's not going to happen. And when he thought about what you said about selling it, which was a point of mine, because I don't want to decrease his value or make it difficult for him. And he thought for a minute and he said, I can't imagine that, Mirabai. He said, it's already there. Nobody, I mean, he didn't see that as being an issue. So I think that, just to give you my perspective, is something to look at. And when you're talking about bringing these models to look at, I know I've offered this in a letter. If anyone wants to come see my place, it's the perfect example. I mean, there's plenty of room on the back. It's right on the boundary. You could see how it will not affect the neighbors. So again, if anyone wants to do that, I'm happy to give you the quick tour. Thank you.
Thanks, Mirabai.
You're welcome.
I
Okay.
drove by your house again, Mirabai. I drove by your house on the way here.
I drove by today too.
So if you see cars slowing down and looking, you know why.
Facing the joint.
Feel free if you have any questions.
All right, any other public comment?
Once we get through this, I want to get a tally board up on chickens versus ADUs. How many chicken coops versus ADUs? And see, to
And
take,
maybe
take a moment.
ADUs coming out of chicken coops.
Right. Sorry,
Okay.
sorry for that.
Right? If it's
I'm gonna close this item of new business. Thank you all very much. We're gonna move to other business, and I know we're running, we took that longer, but we still are going to give time to the PDMU proposal that John Driscoll has thought about and wants to present. So has everybody on the planning commission read that ahead of time? So we're not nobody's coming into this discussion cold. Okay. John, why don't you let us know what you're thinking, and hopefully this isn't like a debate.
I don't think so. I think the background lays it out fairly clearly that we spent a year developing this complicated new zoning for Lexington. And as you can hear from our discussions on ADUs tonight, we still don't know everything that we're up to, even though that we're writing the code. And I just felt that it would be useful for council to have a dedicated work session where they have an opportunity to have Arnie present in detail some of not just the code, the text itself, but what was the intent behind it. And then have and possibly even use the current concept plan to discuss some of the characters of development that we have under Annex 1, and then importantly, the findings. And maybe it's a work session, maybe it's a retreat, it can be with the commission or without the commission, it can be just council alone. But an opportunity when council isn't under the spotlight to make a decision, to systematically go through that zoning text amendment and then have the opportunity to know it better, because council is the primary player in making a lot of the decisions early in the process. The clearer that is early in the process, the less problems we have later on when it comes to commission. So that's the suggestion. It's,
I like this idea a lot. I think that I mean, this was worked up here, right? In commission, all of this stuff. And I know that council passed it. But it does seem like it would be really helpful to folks who are not sitting here thinking about it all the time, but nevertheless are making decisions that are based on this to actually understand, sort of a little bit more of the intent. And I guess this would just go to council for their approval. Is that correct? I mean, like if we recommended it.
We're just
recommending.
We're just recommending, the motion is to recommend that we have a session. So my guess is then it would just go to council to decide if they're
amenable.
Right.
The recommendation, the motion is telling council to have a work session on this. I just see a couple procedural problems with the whole thing. I find it weird for planning commission to tell council to do it. What council will do is evaluate the proposal to see if it is, as the mayor said, a good beginning for the South Main Street Renaissance. What they will then do is expect planning commission to tell them if it fits in, or work with the developer to make it fit in with the PDMU. We put in the PDMU regs ordinance that we would like to meet with the developer ahead of time planning commission, that is, to meet with the developer to talk about some of these things. So I think that, I hope that's what we should, if it gets to that point, work towards. Council's expecting planning commission to do a lot of the heavy lifting on the nitty gritty, specifically the first pass through where a lot of these details get worked out. And as we usually do, make a recommendation to council. As we know, when we get into these kind of discussions, and this is will be a pretty big one, we get council members, nearly everyone will show up to hear what planning commission has to say as the experts on this. So this, whether it fits into the PDMU, is not going to drive council's decision unless you're seeing somewhere that says, stop, you can't do this. We don't have a way of making this work in our zoning. I just think it's backwards.
So I would say, first of all, I don't think we're telling, we're not telling city council to do anything. We're recommending. It's like in city council can say, we'd rather not. Okay. All right. So I think I don't read this as coming off as us telling them what to do. I think it's a suggestion. But I think that, so I'm interested to hear what you said about what planning commission's role would be in the process. Because
Yeah.
I think the concern is that if we're not involved till the end, then that kind of, it can forestall a lot of input, and it can also, difficulties can come up at the end that could have been worked out earlier. And we've seen the problem with that. So I think, and also at the work session the other night, I think it was clear that Echelon actually hadn't thought in terms of the PDMU, in terms of their design. So I think the sooner that's kind of brought to their attention and brought to everyone's attention, the better. I mean, I think there's the question just of what the basic zoning is now. What are the various possibilities? That's all complicated stuff, right? So I think, I don't know, John, you're the one who put this forward, the idea of your thought is, then when would we engage with this? I think that's kind of that's what. my
I mean,
concern is.
and it, Leslie, it doesn't have to be a work session. I know that normally Arnie gives a briefing to the council early in the process.
Mhm.
And so if that happens, I would just recommend, what I'm trying to suggest here is that briefing should be maybe a little bit more extensive and a little bit more understanding of the intent behind the zoning than is normally done. This is an agenda item. Let's move on to the next one, move on to the next one. This would give a chance to explore it a little bit, especially given the scale of the development. I'm quite encouraged by the process you've laid out, but I have to say, to date, that's not how it's worked with planning commission having much say on the feedback on the proposal as it goes along. So many of the decisions are made ahead of time, and that's by nature of the discussions and the negotiations. So I'm just suggesting that if council has an opportunity to maybe have a dedicated session where they really have a chance themselves to delve into the intent behind the zoning, and then they can have the discussion, say, this fits, this doesn't fit, we'd like the planning commission to look at this or more. It doesn't matter how it happens. I just think that an opportunity has to occur where council has a better chance to understand that, because I think that would have been helpful in previous cases.
I guess I'm still kind of lost where we are in the process. Like Echelon has just responded to our RFQ that laid out that we would like to have we'd like to have some affordable housing and in a housing unit and some retail. And they put, their proposal is, yes, we will include all those things. None of us knows what it's going to really look like yet. They had a rough draft of a plan. At this point, council's not going to say, well, if your rough draft can fit into our PDMU, we'll go with it. Council's going to evaluate, is having housing with a mix of commercial the best use for that piece of property? I mean, that's our next step.
So
We're not going to even worry really about it being a PDMU, though I brought that up at the meeting, mostly so the developer knows we have this ordinance. You might want to start looking at it because it sounds like this is going to be the process that you use.
Well, I think that's the idea. And so then the questions from council are oriented with the developer oriented towards what the PDMU is, if that's where they want to go, if that's what the developer wants to do. So there'll be questions, how does the pedestrian orientation, the friendly street, all these things that we have in here.
Right.
And so I'm just suggesting there's a way to become more familiar with this before the process gets too far down the line. In that hearing, that work session that Pat and I attended, you're the only one who raised the question about the zoning. And it didn't, so it's still, yes, it's still early in the process, but it is a fundamental part of making a decision, of shaping the development. That's all I'm saying. And since Planning Commission to date has not been involved in that process, and council takes a strong role in that process, I'm suggesting that council needs an opportunity to become more familiar with the PDMU zoning. That's how it happens. That open to suggestion.
It's like when when the master plan for Washington Lee was coming down the pike, Arnie gave us a good walkthrough of what this is, because none of us had seen one before, right? I think, right? So I think it's that sort of thing, that here's a brand new set of zoning that's hot off the presses from us, and for city council too, and they've never used it. So it's just kind of a question of, I think, sooner rather than later getting this to the forefront, because if this is going to be the zoning, then I think the sooner the better, so that we eliminate some of the rockiness of the Spotswood process. I mean, that was kind of a rocky process early on, and at the end, it was a tough process. So I think looking for ways to smooth that out, so that the first suggestion out of the box from Echelon is not a complete non-starter and waste a lot of time, like there was with Spotswood when they came in with 5-story buildings. I mean, that was a complete non-starter, and I think that could have been avoided. And so I think we're trying to avoid something like that now, where sooner rather than later, we're in the realm of what's possible and what the city wants, if this is going to be the zoning that we're going to use. And so it could happen in different ways.
Right.
And-
And usually it happens with staff giving council an update and presenting it. I mean, this happens. I just find it very odd for planning commission to make this kind of recommendation to council. And at this point, I just think we're getting way off on process, is my personal feeling.
One, and you know me, I'm a softie. We don't have to pass this motion per se. But how to convey to the council that we feel it's important that a session is held to go over the application of the PDMU in this particular case.
Can I suggest something else?
Yeah.
We don't actually have to pass a motion. We could just include these in the minutes, which they will be included in the minutes, and we could ask Leslie to highlight this in her report to the city council, and we could change recommend, we could say request. So we don't need a motion.
No,
This,
we don't.
if we approve this goes into the minutes, right? We like this document. It goes in. So we don't have to make a motion.
Agreed.
Seems like a good compromise to me.
Yeah.
I do think this is important, and this is definitely a key step in applying a very new form of zoning that is new to us, new to the city. So more familiarity with all parties would be great. So if it could be put in the minutes that we request that you sorry, somebody else word it better, because maybe
Well,
John,
you could say that there was discussion of this without a
formal, yeah.
without a vote, taken on a motion, but this was discussed. and you could convey the tenor of the conversation and then how, how you were, what the motion said, what your feeling was as, the council rep here and just, and then
That's
they can
that.
do with it, they can do with it, and
We can reword this to some degree too, instead of taking out proposed motion. Say request, planning a commission request. I don't know.
you could also invite them.
Yeah. See if
We
they
could
can.
take out the whole last section on motion and just ask.
Yeah.
Ask Leslie to
Yeah.
give the background to the
There was
discussion.
this discussion.
Or you could just email Frank and say, hey, I think you should
No,
make sure you understand the
I
PDMU. I'm
did-
not quite sure why we're
Yeah.
doing it so
Well,
formal.
I'll tell you why. I emailed early on in the Spotswood process. I emailed the to everyone. The parts of the comprehensive plan that I thought were not really being adequately discussed as part of the Spotswood discussion, and they weren't incorporated. So I'm just thinking, that's why I'm asking that there's a way that more formally the council really takes a look at some of these issues before we get too far down the road. Council is in the driver's seat on this,
Mhm.
so they should just need to be very familiar with the intent. And I'll give you one of the questions that came up in the work session was a question to Mr. Gaskins, will we need a traffic study? Will you do a traffic study? And he had a very good response, which was, well, maybe the traffic study should be for the broader area and not just for this particular project, because if this does stimulate other development, then all of a sudden there will be more traffic in the whole area, and that's a sensitive street because of the school and everything else. So I thought it was a very good answer.
It was a very good answer. And so what is our process? Our process is that will come up before planning commission first, and planning commission will make that recommendation to council.
Down the road.
I mean, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do the traffic study till we have a design. We don't know what we're designing until we start the PDMU process.
I think the question is basically, is Echelon familiar with PDMU? And they said they weren't.
And that's exactly why I asked that question. And Arnie and Echelon and Urban Corps will have those discussions.
Right.
That's where it starts is.
Right.
Just if I could clarify that
Yeah.
particular point, maybe 2 weeks ago, Randy asked, hey, mixed use, how do we do that in PDMUs? The answer, and then we went back with a couple of emails sort of laying out, not details about PDMU, but just sort of some of the larger points. But their plan had already been submitted with the proposal, however
Right.
long ago that was. So I don't want you to think that they designed what they submitted based on PDMU.
No, that's
because that was
exactly.
after the
That's
fact.
that's my
And
point,
then-
right?
So for it to be mixed use, it's likely going to have to change to some degree. Or they also have the option, and I'm thinking particularly, maybe I'm getting too far into this, but they wanted, which is a good urban design tactic, to bring the building closer to the street. So they may be coming back before you to amend PDMU to allow that setback reduction on the front side, just to allow that better design of having not the parking in the front along Waddell and actually bringing the building closer. So there may already be that build up to the VDOT property with an amendment to PDMU just based on the design, which doesn't look great admittedly. And I see the grimace there, but that's just to make you aware that.
Developers just rewriting our zoning right now. Is that? Yeah.
But we're not going to have many of these PDMUs. And if they have legitimately a design that is maybe better than we contemplated, and we brought the setbacks forward from PUD, we didn't really amend that setback section that I'm talking about. So I'm not sure, the optics may not be great, but if it's an improved product, then it may not be such a bad thing.
I think this is the conversation we're kind of asking city council to have kind of
It's-
right now.
It's hard for me, if I may chime
Yeah.
in, that what am I presenting to them that they haven't already seen? So when they went through the approval process, they saw the PDMU text, which is really PUD, which they've already had before. Not that we had many PUDs, and then we tweaked it a bit for mixed use. So they've seen that. So I could read to them the intent section again and try to remember what some of the discussion that you all had. But I really don't think it means much unless you have something to gauge it by. So what is their design? Right now, that design, as we've talked about, is a draft design at best. It probably doesn't meet the PDMU because they put something together without maybe really considering what PDMU is. So we could maybe have that 30,000 foot discussion on some of the items in there, but I'm not really sure it's valuable until we know that they're going to do PDMU. And that's after they're given the project to begin with, or the property. We haven't
Yeah.
decided that yet. So there may still be some time
I
for some of
agree.
this.
It doesn't, when I'm suggesting this, I'm not saying that this has to be done tomorrow. I'm just saying to fit it into the process wherever it's most appropriate. And if Leslie, if council feels comfortable asking the commission to weigh in earlier, that's fine too. I'm just saying it's new zoning. Before the conversation goes too far down the road, they have a chance to really look at this and understand what the intent was for the zoning in that for that lot.
And we've all read it when we approved it. I think you're underestimating how much council relies on planning commission for the nuts and bolts. Planning commission does not design the project, though we did allow ourselves in this case for the PDMU a little leeway in it that we don't have in other things. So that will be new, and that'll be new at the planning commission level. And I think council will be all in favor of that, because what council is going to look at this point is this the right use for that piece of property? And then they're going to look at us and say, you work out with them how many apartments they're allowed to have and where it needs to be and all that.
But that didn't happen with Spotswood. So I'm just.
I don't understand what you're saying. It met our zoning. So I don't understand why you're saying that.
With relationship to the comprehensive plan, is that what you're talking? I mean,
And that is a different, your opinion. I can tell you, all council members read their emails. If council members didn't agree with your position, that's one
Well,
thing.
that's fine.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, that's
fine.
what
I
it
just
was,
wanted it
because
to
we
be-
all read your emails or anybody's
No,
emails.
that's fine. That's fine. I just thought that it should, in that case, it should be part of a public discussion. That's all. If it's in the comprehensive plan, you read it, you say yes or no, and it's part of a discussion. So I'm just asking that because at the end, I think, well, no, we don't need to go into the details of Spotswood. We're trying to be proactive here, not retro. So-
I just chime in because I want to stay past 7. I can understand why council might be insulted by this request, because it's saying that Lord, you're asking me to do my homework. And that's kind of what I mean, I understand and I think the concerns are legit, but there is, there's a questioning of the council in terms of the preparation that I'm just saying that so I can understand that we may want to be careful about not.
so the conversation, Leslie, the conversation that council has already had with the developer of what you would like to see the land used for, with mixed use of commercial, mixed use of residential, mixed, different number of units that are, below market rate.
Mhm.
You've already had that discussion. So you've already, and so that part of you steering the developer to what the city's appetite for has already happened.
Right, and that's a good point. First, we put out the request for qualifications. One response came back, and then there was a panel that reviewed it. And one things that the panel really liked about it were that it was a mix of uses, having both the residential and the retail. They really liked that. And that there was affordable housing pedestrian friendly, great location for it. So yes, that happened first. Then it came to us. We heard the same thing that group heard. And that's as far as it's gone. So council at this point will have to decide, are we happy having one proposal? Is this the type of use that we want for this spot? Is that's what's going to cause the renaissance for that part of town? And if so, then we'll proceed down the path of allowing them to do design and it still all happens before we actually sell them the property, you know.
So I'm not insulting council's process nor their intelligence and understanding zoning. Most of them have been on the planning commission. I'm just suggesting that given this is new zoning, they have the opportunity to ask and with Arnie in the session, go through and clearly understand the intent of this zoning when you get to that part. That's all. I mean, you do
And
it
that's fine.
anyway.
It's not that complicated, I guess is what I get.
Well,
down
I
to
think it's more complicated than, and I could sit down and write a longer piece for you, but it's not just that it's more complicated, it's also the transparency, so everyone understands what's going on. That's helpful. Anyway,
And maybe that's also transparency for the public, because I know that there were some folks who were not happy about how things went with the last with Spotswood, and maybe that's part of it is saying, okay, you know what, let's make sure that everybody knows that we're caring about this. Not that you don't, just
I know,
just,
yeah,
you
but
know.
you're not gonna please everyone on transparency.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many meetings we had on Spotswood and people still coming up at the end saying,
Yeah,
oh, wait, you're gonna build something on that piece of
I
property?
know.
It's been in our comprehensive plan for over 25 years that
Right.
property will be developed and
Right.
I mean,
okay.
yeah.
So
I-
where are-
I-
So does Echelon know, I mean, do they have access? I mean, obviously they have access to, but have you all talked with them about the green infrastructure plan? I'm just wondering
They
whether,
actually have read our comprehensive plan and it showed when they made their
Okay.
Spotswood presentation. I thought it showed in this presentation, I assumed they had read our PDMU because it incorporated so many aspects of it
Mm.
in it. But they will read it and they will meet multiple times with Arnie about it so that they get a project together that complies with it.
Yeah.
Or, as Arnie said, and we allow this to anybody, they may submit a amendment to the ordinance, which is a process we allow as well. We don't have to allow it if that's not what we see as being beneficial, but that's an option as well.
yeah, okay.
I'm again, Leslie, and for the council, I'm not questioning the negotiations, the program. It's often like Pat said, here at the commission, we're not the ones who decide on the business model. So we're strictly looking at the land use and planning implications. It's new zoning. Let's be familiar with it. So in the discussions with the client or the developer, we have good informed discussion. It's not saying, anyway, that's simple, done. So where are we with this? It's 7:00.
Well, as long as Kate captured every word of this, then just forward that to city council. They know that it's an important issue that we take seriously, and this, but it almost is like, why do we even spend all this time doing the zoning text if it's just going to get amended right away? Anyways, that's beside the point.
Letting it fly in his penultimate meeting as chair.
So I go back to when Jamie Gooden said after the comp plan, I can't wait till it gets the first amendment.
Yeah. All right, let's,
Or reading it.
well, I appreciate all sides of this discussion, and I see all sides. And I think as long as it's on the record that planning commission feels passionately about, you know, the intent and application of the new PDMU, if that's the direction that is going to be taken, that everyone just is fully aware. And I know Arnie always does a great job prepping city council, so we'll just keep relying on that. But we're not gonna make a motion or official request or recommendation at this time. Let's move on to,
That's a good summary. For the minutes, thank you.
Okay, we're gonna go to zoning and planning report.
Held a kickoff meeting today this morning with the City Hall feasibility study, which includes a space needs assessment and assessment of the building itself. First part of a 3-part process for upgrades to City Hall. Public Works tasked one of their on-call consultants with reviewing the sewer capacity for the VDOT property. And the initial assessment that we heard about today is largely positive in the sense that the investment that council has made in relining a lot of Providence Hill area and the relining that's to come is indeed helping open up capacity for the sewer system. And that will be very beneficial and is likely sufficient at this time even to allow 200 units on the VDOT property. So initial assessment was very good, very positive. And the city is also investigating whether a housing condition survey is worthwhile. And this would be a 1 or 2 day sort of windshield survey. That was something that CSPDC recommended as a possibility. This is ancillary or in addition to the regional housing study that's going on. They recommended that we could potentially hire a consultant to go around and do a windshield survey, take a couple of days, and maybe
What's a windshield
not
survey?
necessarily drive by and look through their windshield,
I see.
maybe even get out of their car, but a fairly not invasive or in depth by going and knocking on doors and looking at the actual conditions, but they can, as they described it, assess the building with a good eye, with more detail than you might expect to come out of that. I'm not saying that well, but they don't need to go into each building and look at all the rooms just by doing a windshield survey, and at a fairly modest cost. And over a couple of days, they could do the entire city. And that might be helpful for us to know how to sort of target grants or target programs with that information. So
What
that's
exactly would
something-
they be looking at?
the condition of the house. So it's a housing
Just that.
conditions
Okay.
survey.
So whether it's being kept up or whether it's run
Correct.
down.
And then that could lead to, we have 20% of our dwellings that need new roofs or, something of that nature. So it's to give us a idea of condition and where we may be able to apply for DHCD grants or however else we could proceed with that more detailed information than we have now, which is also not part of the overall regional housing study. So that's being contemplated right now. That's all I have for a zoning report.
Arnie, a question on a feasibility study for the, is that for, you said that was for the sewer, for the 200, up to 200 units?
That was the impetus for doing that assessment, to see if, one, we know that we have roughly 200 on the horizon, and has the work that has been ongoing with the relining of pipes to get rid of the inflow and infiltration, has that been successful? And the initial assessment is yes. Is that the question?
Yeah,
For the
no,
200?
that helps. You and I have talked a lot about this, and it goes back to my questions. What is the capacity for that entire South Lexington if it was to be fully developed the way we're contemplating? Is that part of that assessment?
No, in the sense that they fully realize that there's more development potential out there. But immediately, what were we asking? Because dwelling units use so much more water than retail restaurants, I presume, as well. So the immediate question is more about 200 units. And then all the work that is being done, that the investment that has been going in the last couple of years, and that is continuing. So it's to show that that is paying off and will likely easily accommodate the 200 units. Knowing also that if there's another large development, whatever it may be in that area, then additional assessments will have to be done to see if the sewer capacity can accommodate that, with further lining, with further addressing inflow and infiltration, or maybe at some point it goes gangbusters in 15 years and the pipes have to be upsized.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking. I mean, across the street is multifamily zoning.
Right.
So, and if that's the next growth area, it's something to be thinking about more long-term because it has obvious financial implications for the city. So.
And the other added benefit to this that I should or could add is simply that we are paying a lot of money at the sewer treatment plant each year. And I can't remember if it's $300,000 per year just for this sewer shed or sub shed. But we are paying significant money to have this rainwater and groundwater treated at the sewer plant. So even if we weren't able to open up capacity for 200 units, we're still long-term saving money for not sending rainwater to the sewer treatment plant.
All right, thank you. Major project updates. You said you had a big thing coming up next meeting. What's that? The WNL.
Site plan for a new structure at WNL.
Cool. City council report.
So before we do it, Arnie, can I ask?
Yes, the answer is yes.
Yes.
The attorney has been asked to provide guidance on conflicts, if that's the question. And I'm hoping it is.
I wanted to borrow $500, but that'll do too.
Oh, yes.
Thank you for both.
All right, thank you. City council report.
City council met last Thursday and we did approve the amended bylaws for the planning commission. We interviewed school board candidates. There's 4 candidates for one position. And then we had a work session on Monday, which was what we just talked about. Echelon gave their presentation. And that's all I have.
Awesome. Motion to adjourn, anyone?
So moved.
Second.
Racing the second. All right, all in favor?